Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for indulging our colleague, Mr. McHenry, in his 5-minute question. One of the interesting things that we find in politics is much like you learn when you grow up. Never judge a book by its cover. Interestingly, we are seeing the Democratic Party actually make a vehement argument in favor of creating an entity that is as far from the people and the democratic process as it can be. I only note that because I find it very odd. It's odd not only because they claim to want popular participation, people empowerment over their own decisions. It's actually contrary to the wave of the future. And it's in keeping with the founding principles of this country for us to oppose putting one person in power. After all, the first President of the United States stepped down because he did not wish to be a king, because he understood Lord Acton's dictum that all power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And yet here we find ourselves in the 21st century saying that despite all of the changes in our world, despite all the changes in our lives, despite all the changes in our economy, despite the ability to use a social network to make our own decisions, to access information, to conduct our own personal transactions based upon that information in nanoseconds around the world, we continue to say that we need one person to save us from ourselves. That here in the United States of America, a country built upon self-government, in the 21st century, we're relying on 19th, 18th century concepts that one individual, however enlightened and benevolent they may be, are necessary for the running of the entire American economy, for the running of every American's life so they can make financial decisions. Now, I would like to point out that having opposed the Wall Street bailout is absolutely the wrong precedent to set in the first crisis of our globalized economy. In many ways, this regulatory scheme is the bitter fruits of misdeeds that occurred during that crisis and precipitated it. So I have no sympathy necessarily for those who must suffer under the yoke of this new entity. But I would remind everyone that the central argument that we're really having here about this CFPB is whether or not you can govern your own life, is what is the proper role of government in the 21st century. How do you match that government with an economy that has become flat, that has become horizontal, that empowers you every day to extents undreamt in human history? And unfortunately, the answer continues to be much what we heard when President Roosevelt rejected the calls to become a short-term dictator because only one person could get the American economy out of the Great Depression. We've always rejected the concept that it is a person who will save us. And instead of worrying about the person that holds it, be it a Democratic appointee, be it a Republican appointee, worry about the expansion of the powers of the state. Now, I know that back in the 80s and 90s when the Soviet Union was going under, there was a school of thought that said communism would still work if Stalin hadn't ruined what Lenin put in place. I only bring this up because it continues to reinforce my point. What we are concerned about here is the expansion of the power of the state. And we know that when you expand the powers of the state, regardless of who's going to be in charge of it, you're going to have problems somewhere down the road because you've gotten away from the very principles which allow us to be a free people and have this debate. Now, if there are those members of the Congress who believe that having their duly elected representatives have oversight over this entity because we are so inherently corrupt, I would like to ask if they only exclude themselves from that, or if they are worried about their own temptation to sin and make the situation worse. I would ask them to go back to their constituents and say, you know those bureaucrats that are always so responsive when you have a problem, that always come through? We're going to make them even more powerful now, but the good news is there'll only be one to tell us no, or to ignore us, or to ignore you. No. The CFPB's problem is it's based upon an outdated, antiquated model of government that will not work, especially at a period of time when the wave of the future is individual freedom, it is empowerment, and that is going to continue whether big vertical government likes it or not. And I assure you, regardless of the outcome of this debate or these bills, big government's going to get flattened beneath the power of the people. Oh, I yield back. I have no question.
Gentleman yields back.